Good evening, and welcome to the region of Waterloo's Webcast on the future of transportation in our community. My name is Mike Farwell, and it's my pleasure to serve as your moderator this evening. Over the next hour, we're going to talk at some length about the decisions facing the region of Waterloo and how those decisions will impact this community for decades to come. Primarily, what we're going to be talking about is rapid transit, the history of the project, and how it ties into the bigger plans for moving people and sharing this community. We will be delving into the choices about what to build, how quickly, and at what cost, and the pros and the cons of each of the different options. This webcast is part of a broader public consultation, which will include public information centers at locations around the region of Waterloo later this month. Let me introduce to you the panel that we've got joining us this evening from the region of Waterloo. To my immediate left, we've got Thomas Schmidt. He's the Commissioner of Transportation and Environmental Services. Next to him is Darshpreet Badi, the region's Manager of Rapid Transit Engineering. Next we have Rob Horn, Commissioner of Planning, Housing and Community Services, and Graham Vincent, the Director of Transportation Planning. Our format for this webcast is very straightforward. I will start off by having a chat with our panelists, and as we discuss the issues, we encourage you to submit your questions. We'll also leave time at the end for more questions, should you have them. We do have an hour, and while we will try to get to as many questions as possible during the webcast, we may not get to all of them, but again, we do encourage you to send them in. So, gentlemen, let's begin. And I think since we are talking about rapid transit in this region, it would serve us well to begin at the beginning and look at some of the history. So, Rob, let's start with you and explain to us how the region got to the point where it's at today.
I think, Mike, I'd take us back about 10 years when the region started thinking about putting a sustainability strategy together. If I go a little further back to 1976, our region was about 290,000 people. By 2001, we'd grown to about 440,000 people, and it was quite clear that we were going to continue to grow, and we have. With the sustainability discussions, Council really developed the idea with the public into what became known as the Regional Growth Management Strategy. And since then, there were a number of initiatives that were identified, about 80 or more, and they were specific to things like creating more employment lands, designating environmentally sensitive areas, putting together a homelessness to housing strategy, and rapid transit was a part of that initiative. So really, I think Council recognized that there were a number of ways that we as a community had to position ourselves to accommodate future growth and change. And certainly we're doing that today. And the other piece that was quite interesting to that evolution was that in 2006, the provincial government brought in new legislation, which was the Provincial Places to Grow Growth Plan. And the growth plan mandated us to build in a more compact way, to plan for higher order transit, and to be a more dense community. And what I think what was very interesting to that was that the provincial directive and the region's growth management strategy are very much aligned. The objectives are very similar. And that has really set the stage for what is happening today and what's happening on the ground. So we're busy implementing a number of actions, and the Rapid Transit Initiative is one of those.
Okay, so rapid transit, clearly a buzzword, a buzz phrase in this community. Do we all know what exactly rapid transit means? Darshpreet, maybe you can help us with that. What is rapid transit?
Well, Mike, regardless of the technology, the objective is to provide a fast, reliable, and a frequent service. We have to make sure that it is competitive to the car. And to achieve that, the proposal is to run the vehicles in dedicated lanes and to give them priority at all road crossings. So vehicles would only be stopping at stations.
Okay. Now, it's one thing to talk about this community today. It's quite another thing to talk about this community 10, 20, and 30 years from now. As I said at the beginning, this is about shaping our community for decades to come. So, Thomas, let's come to you. Why is rapid transit important, not now, but to the future of this community?
And you've said part of it already. It's about shaping our community. So the rapid transit plan, as we're envisioning it, has two main goals. One is moving people, which I think everyone understands. It's really about providing some choice to the customers here, the traveling public. They can use their cars, they can use bikes, they can walk, they can use buses, they can use a rapid transit system to get around, providing that choice. But also about changing the way this community grows. We've been a community that has generally grown outwards, and now we're trying to focus that growth back into the central corridor. And having a rapid transit system provides a catalyst that will allow that to happen. So it allows development to happen in the downtown core and changes the community and has it be the type of community that we want and have the quality of life that we want in the future.
Okay. Graham, rapid transit is one thing, but I get the sense at times we're talking about more than just rapid transit when we look at the future of transportation in the region of Waterloo. So what else is included in the plan?
Well, we have developed what we call the Regional Transportation Master Plan, and that's a strategic direction that, of what the transportation network will look like in 20 years. The rapid transit system is a foundation of that plan, but we've also developed many other components of it. It's a comprehensive plan that includes all surface modes of transportation. So, and as Thomas mentioned, it's also about how do we create greater transportation choice. The current transportation system is reaching capacity. The road capacity that we've had has been used up over the past 20 years, and now we're starting to run into congestion at a number of locations around the region. So it's how do we address that? And so the new Transportation Master Plan focuses on increasing transit service. We've developed a network or a grid system of I-Express type services that go throughout the region, including some of the suburban areas. An example would be the Fisher-Hallman I-Express, which we're looking at implementing fairly soon, depending on council budget approval. And that would run from the University of Waterloo to South Kitchener along the Fisher-Hallman corridor. So we have a network of those that will connect in and be integrated with the rapid transit system at various stations. And we're also looking at realigning our local system as well, the conventional system, to increase frequencies and again to realign with the rapid transit network. There are other components, including increasing the opportunities for active transportation. And by active transportation, we mean cycling and walking. Records are indicating that there's about 43% of the residents of Waterloo Region live within 5 kilometers of where they work. So with the proper infrastructure and service, we can capture some of those trips, by other modes of transportation. We recognize that roads are going to continue to be an important part of our future, and we've developed a strategic road improvement that will be built as part of this 20-year plan that will complement the transit networks, will also help with goods movements within the community, and also deal with strategic areas of congestion. We also have as part of the plan, we are looking at what we call travel demand management, and that's where we look at managing the demand. We're working with businesses to look at car sharing, carpooling. We offer a corporate pass, which is a discount transit pass for corporations if they have so many employers. So that's the transportation demand management, and also the policy support is a key component of the whole plan as well. Whether it's just transportation or how we build out our land use, the integration of land use and transportation is part of that. Having mixed uses that are close to each other that will encourage people to walk is one example. Also, parking supply and strategies is also going to be key to how we move forward. And last of all, we know this is a plan. This is a new type of plan for this area, and it's going to be important that we monitor the process as we go through. So we're going to have annual updates that we report to council and update the Transportation Master Plan every 5 years to give the opportunity to adjust as we move forward.
I think, Mike, just on top of that as well, to Graham's point, we need to recognize as well that Grand River Transit today and in 2010 provided 18 million rides over the course of the year, and that's about double what occurred in 1999. So that's a very, very big quantum. And I think the other piece of the puzzle is that we've seen really great market convergence with public policy when we talk about intensification. So in terms of the area that we define as the built boundary, so the built-up area of our community, last year over 50% of development occurred within that built boundary. We've also seen over $1 billion in the last 7 years invested in industrial, commercial, and institutional within that built-up area. So there's a lot that we're building from as well, and I think it's a really important point that we shouldn't miss.
Okay. Darshpreet, when you were explaining what rapid transit was a moment ago. You referred to it as any mode of transportation. And that reminds me of one of the ongoing debates around rapid transit in this community, and that is whether or not the system should be based on buses or it should be based on trains. What's the difference?
Well, when you compare the two technologies, there are significant differences. Similar systems have been built across the world. And one key observation that is well documented is that people just prefer trains over buses. And the perception from the rider's point of view is really that trains are faster, they're more comfortable, they're reliable, and most importantly, they're permanent. And it is the accumulative effect of these benefits that results in higher ridership and intensification. And this is not anecdotal information. In fact, this has been proven in cities like Calgary, Vancouver, Portland, Denver, San Diego. There are other benefits too. Simply a LRV or light rail vehicle can carry more people than a bus. I mean, you can connect multiple LRVs to create a train. A train, just to give you an example, a two-car train that we're planning for by 2031 can carry close to 450 people. It would take 6 buses to carry the same amount of capacity. Now imagine our projections show that in Kitchener, roughly speaking, you would have a load of 2,700 passengers. We can meet that demand by 6 vehicles running at 7.5 minute headway. It would take a bus running every minute and a half to meet the same demand. Now imagine pushing all those buses through our downtown cores, and it becomes a challenge. So it's not an issue of buses not being able to carry the people. It's the number of buses that we can accommodate within our constrained rights of way, and we have to be careful of the technology we choose, because we want to make sure that whatever system is implemented, it's there for the next 50 years, the century, and not just for the next 10 or 20 years.
Okay. Gentlemen, clearly we're not alone in cyberspace tonight as we broadcast this webcast. So let's go to one of our first questions from a viewer. It comes from Bill. Bill wants to know how we get people to think about the future and get them away from the thinking of we don't need it now.
Just to set the stage a little bit more, I think Darshpreet started well on that. We are going to add in the next 20 years another Kitchener to this region. And Thomas also alluded to the fact that we do not want to promote sprawl. We do have a good inventory of suburban greenfield development as it currently stands. But we have to find a way to accommodate this additional 200,000 people and 100,000 jobs for that matter. And I think it's a very good point, because we really, when we plan, we can't simply plan for static. I mean, there's often discussion about growth versus non-growth. I think any prosperous community like Waterloo Region is dynamic. It is always changing. Our ethnic diversity is changing. Our average household size is decreasing. Our population is aging. And there are a whole bunch of considerations that aren't always apparent now. And that's why we're planning out, and why we're trying to avoid to plan out of crisis or out of imminent crisis.
Right. I think one of the examples is the expressway. I mean, when the expressway was built, people said, we're not going to use it, we don't need it, we're not big enough. And now it's absolutely vital. Where would the region of Waterloo be without the expressway? So I think that's part of it. We've done this type of thinking in the past. The region, I think, is known for looking forward. And I think it's something that in this process we're going to see. We're going to get comments from the public. People are listening to this webcast today, and they have an opportunity to provide their questions, hear this, and learn and see what we see coming in the future and provide their feedback on that.
And there's no question, based on the expressway example, we'll get far greater feedback today than we ever would have 40, 50 years ago.
Definitely. We have so many opportunities. We have this webcast. We're having public consultation centers. There's our website. You can Twitter, Facebook, lots of different ways to get comments and questions into us.
Right. Okay. Bill, thank you very much for that question. Let's go to another viewer question. This one comes to us from Patrick. Thank you, Patrick. He wants to know, is it guaranteed that one of the 10 rapid transit options offered will be implemented over the next few years?
Well, I think what we're doing right now is going through a process of providing information to the public, getting feedback from the public. We have in the past already evaluated all of these options, and we'll be going back to council, regional council, on April 12th, first with what we see as a preferred option, and then in June with a finalized option for their decision. But ultimately, it is council's decision on what we move forward with, whether that be light rail, bus rapid transit, or some other alternative. But council will eventually make that decision, and we're hoping before the summer.
Right. And if I can dovetail on what Patrick was asking, he talked about the 10 options. There's actually an 11th one, if memory serves, in there, and the 11th option is status quo, do nothing. Wouldn't that save us a bunch of money if we just did nothing?
Well, the 11th option actually has a price tag attached to it, and we are saying it is an option that has costs. Some of those are financial costs, so we're estimating that by putting in rapid transit, we can avoid about $400 or $500 million worth of roads that we would have to build. But we're also saying that building those roads it's not really possible for us to build those roads. We would be going through built-up neighborhoods. So if you can imagine Westmount Rose, it's a 4-lane road right now. Imagine it as a 6-lane road. We would be basically destroying the front yards of the homes on each side of that neighborhood. And we would have to do that in a lot of different neighborhoods. And we really don't see that as a feasible or viable option that we could move forward with. So really the do nothing or the business as usual option, it's not really implementable, and we're going to have lots of congestion. Right? We will continue to see traffic grow and the problems associated with traffic, whether that's pollution or sitting, just the time wasted and fuel wasted sitting in traffic.
Right. I think the other piece of that, and viewers may not be aware, but the provincial and federal governments have announced $565 million worth of capital grants to the Rapid Transit Initiative, and of course that is very substantial incentive for us, and we now find ourselves at the stage where we are reviewing the project in the context of additional public input and the options and affordability. So that's the other piece of the puzzle, $565 million.
Right. Okay. Patrick, thank you very much for the question. We've got another from viewer Kevin. Kevin wants to know why we're doing loops in the downtown.
Well, the loops in the downtown are a result of extensive design work that we did in the past few years, looking at all the different route alignments. And it's really challenging going through our downtown areas. Basically, we are limited to very narrow corridors, and we have to be able to not only maintain light rail or BRT services, we have to provide enough capacity for normal traffic circulation. We have to be able to not impact the properties. We have to be able to provide on-street parking. So going through a number of different options, you soon shortlist. Your shortlist soon becomes an option where you actually can't be on a single corridor because you're impacting all the properties, you're impacting all the utilities. So you start looking at parallel corridors. Can we put it on a corridor that is to the east or to the west? So for example, in Kitchener, King Street was initially considered. There were many reasons why it was taken off the long list of route alternatives. So then we started looking at Charles Street. We then looked at Duke Street. None of them by themselves can accommodate a two-way RT corridor on them, along with traffic and along with parking, because we were pretty much impacting the entire corridor. We were impacting all the properties adjacent to the road right-of-way itself. So the next best option is loops, and it's not unique to us. In fact, Portland, Denver, San Diego, I mean, pretty much a lot of different rapid transit projects throughout North America have implemented loops. So I wouldn't see it as a negative. We actually did go through all the different alternatives, and this is the best solution that we can actually implement while still maintaining the integrity of the system and providing the benefits that we need to.
So in other words, there's the service to the core without negatively impacting that core.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Mark has another question, and thank you very much for the previous question, Kevin. Mark wants to know, or he starts with the statement, I love the idea of rapid transit, okay, but the times I saw published for LRT from Conestoga to Fairview Mall didn't sound very, and I'll use the air quotes, rapid. Can you tell us how fast it will be and how those times would compare to driving?
I will take, I'm not sure what the driving time is today. I believe from Conestoga to Fairview, it's probably close to maybe 35, 40 minutes. But the system that we're proposing, depending on the option you take, can have different times, because the options, as you may have seen, some start at Conestoga Mall, some start at Northfield Drive. So depending on the option you have, the timing could be different. But roughly speaking, it's about, I'm going off memory here, but the entire system from Conestoga to Ainslie, which was approved last year by Regional Council, was about 75 minutes. The options range from 70 to 75 minutes depending on where your start terminal is. But the key message here is not how much time it takes. The one thing to recognize is the times will be consistent over the years. It's an exclusive dedicated lane, so you're not going to incur more delay as the system grows and you have more congestion, whereas the existing service that we're providing today will actually incur more delay because they're sharing their roadway with the traffic. The rapid transit, if it's 75 minutes today, it will be 75 minutes 100 years down the road.
Right.
The other thing is with more intensification and higher densities, we're going to see a shift. There will be more shorter trips rather than longer trips, and that's where you will see the benefit of rapid transit.
So in other words, Mark and I may not be riding that system from one end right to the other. There will be many intervals along
Yes.
the way that we'll be taking.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question, Mark. Sue wants to know. She says, I live in one of the townships within the region of Waterloo. Will my property taxes increase to pay for this rapid transit? If yes, approximately by how much?
Well, I think the simple answer is that no, property taxes from the townships will not be used to pay for rapid transit. And that's similar to the transit system right now. Grand River Transit is fully funded by Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge. And the rapid transit system would also be fully funded by Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge.
Okay. Sue, thank you very much for the question. Janet, one of our other viewers, has this question. How do you know our population is going to grow as much as you project?
I can probably provide the generalized answer. There is a lot of forecasting that goes into not only this, but to the broader planning for regional infrastructure, water, wastewater, land. And a couple of examples. One, when the province put its growth plan together, it consulted us. We looked at trending. We looked at the available land. We looked at density, what we can achieve. And basically, we continually track actual to projected growth. I can tell you in recent years, we have been very, very close on our projections. We also, though, recognize that growth is not constant. And in 2008, when the global recession came, there was some downturn in the economy, but we were relatively strong in our growth, and we maintained that strength. Last year was another good example. I believe we issued permits for about 4,000 new homes, and that's a very strong year region-wide. But there are also broader indicators, and as we come more onto the global stage, especially in the tech sector, that growth becomes more constant, and there are fewer hills and valleys when you look at growth. But it's fairly complex, but there are a lot of checks and balances, and we are always checking in against what those forecasts are.
Okay.
In a nutshell, we have been tracking on the forecasts. I mean, that's the other part of this. If you look at what we have forecast, we are pretty much on track with what we forecast 10 years ago. And if you look at the last 20 years of growth, the growth we're projecting for the next 20 years is about the same.
Right.
So it's not unreasonable what's being projected at all.
And that projection right now, 750,000 by 2031, is that where we're at?
About 730,000.
730,000
Yes.
by 2031.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. Let's go to another one now from Craig. Craig wants to know, what are the implications if the ridership does not meet the 12% goal? What level is necessary for this project to be successful?
Yeah, perhaps I can address that question. As the ridership, the rapid transit ridership, but did not set targets, and Darshpreet may want to comment on how those were calculated. But in the Transportation Master Plan, we did set targets for both conventional transit across key areas within the region, and we also set target for our active transportation goal as well, and that's the active transportation again being cycling and walking. So our current cycling and walking is at 9%, and I believe this is where the 12% comes from, is that is our target for cycling and walking throughout the region. And we believe with the intensification that's being suggested and with the additional infrastructure for cycling and walking that we intend to implement, that an increase of 3% over the next 20 years is achievable. And particularly when you consider the amount of people, the 43% of the people that live within 5 kilometers of where they work.
Just to further comment on that, the ridership for rapid transit was not based on a target. It's a standard modeling exercise where you take in your land use projections for the future, and the trips within the model, the option is given to the driver itself, and they choose what is the most appropriate mode of transportation for them to make their trip to and from their destination. So it wasn't a target set by us. It's really a modeling exercise which tells you what the ridership would be based on all the assumptions that you make on, with respect to land use, with respect to the network, the improvements you provide, the kind of service that you would be offering to the public through rapid transit. And it looks at the technology itself too. So if it's light rail, if it's BRT, I mean, the model actually has different parameters within itself to allow the driver to make those decisions.
Right. And the projections that have been done, they've been peer reviewed. And the people that peer reviewed it actually thought we were low with our ridership projections. And I think it's fair to say most, if not all, transit systems, rapid transit systems that have been put in place across North America have usually actually seen much more ridership than what they originally projected. So if you look across, most of them, they project a certain ridership and they easily exceed what they projected.
Just to add to that, the Ottawa O train, initial projections were about 5,000 people a day, and within 2 years, they were already at 11,000 a day. Same thing with Charlotte. They had estimated a ridership of close to 9,000 people per day. Within the first 3-4 years, they were already surpassing 16,000. So there is a lot of latent demand, and our I-Express routes and other similar routes have shown that there's the demand. So once the appropriate technology is implemented, we would actually see that gain in ridership over the years.
Right. Darshpreet, when you said BRT
Yes.
a moment ago, the little light bulb went off, and because we have so many acronyms. We've got LRT for light rail transit, we've got BRT for bus rapid transit, and one of the others that has appeared now is ABRT. What is that, and how is it different from BRT?
The only difference, the primary difference between the two is that bus rapid transit, BRT, is running or operating on dedicated lanes.
Okay.
The adapted BRT will not be running on dedicated lanes, but we will complement it with operational improvements, signal priority, queue jumping. We would improve the intersection geometry itself so buses can bypass congestion. We will be providing bus bypass shoulder lanes on Highway 8 and 401. So if it's free flow, the buses move with the traffic, but if traffic slows beyond below 40 kilometers an hour, they can make use of the shoulder to bypass the congested areas. So it would be similar to what York has implemented for their Viva system, what Brampton has implemented for their Zoom system, what Mississauga has recently implemented for their My Way system. So,
okay, and remember that one for the quiz at the end of the webcast, the ABRT and BRT. We'll get all our acronyms straightened out. Thanks very much for the question, Craig. Landon has a question. Wants to know, is there any idea about what the cost per ride will be?
We are working on that aspect of the rapid transit system. There hasn't been a decision made on it. I would expect that the fares would be comparable to what you may pay in that year for your conventional transit. There may be a slight premium because you are providing a higher service, but that decision would have to be approved by council.
Okay. From Landon's question, and thank you very much for that, we have another one that's come in. Will it be easy for seniors to use the stations to access any rapid rail trains?
Yes, definitely. The stations will be just as high as your standard sidewalk. They're 6 inches above the ground. The trains are called low, or the BRT buses even have now low floor buses and low floor trains. So basically they would be flush with where the platform is, where people are waiting. So if you're on a wheelchair, you can easily roll onto the bus or the train. And the access to the station itself, most of the stations are situated at signalized intersections. So you have the crosswalks to get to the station, and they would be designed to ensure that anyone who's disabled or has a hearing impairment, they can actually access the station without any problems.
Okay, so while we're talking about stations, what are they going to look like? Can you give us a sense of that?
Yeah. In our design to date, we have assumed 2-car trains for 2031, so the platforms are about 60 meters long, about 3 meters wide, enough to allow passengers to wait before they board. They would have your common amenities where a cyclist could park its bike, It's wheelchair accessible. You would be able to purchase your ticket before you board onto the train or the bus, so it's much more effective that way. And you would have digital information informing the passengers when the next train or buses are arriving.
Okay.
I think as well, to Darshpreet's comment, the station areas, the broader areas around the stations themselves, are generally of a higher density, perhaps in the areas around them, mixed-use developments. Often you'll find employers wanting to locate along the lines. But certainly if you look at other communities, and some of the ones that Darshpreet alluded to, as well as places like Salt Lake City and Portland, you'll find that there is a real sensitivity to neighborhood as well. So it's not the imposition of something that has such massing and scale that it's just not appropriate. Yet there is a recognition that these are higher density nodes. So if you go from community to community, they all look slightly different. But there is a presence when you start reaching some critical masses.
Okay. Landon, thank you for the questions. Let's go to another webcast viewer. Alan would like to know, how can you justify using the region's population numbers to sell LRT to the taxpayers but not make the whole region pay for it? So this goes back to the point earlier from the townships, I would suspect.
Well, the number that we've been using is 500,000 approximately, and actually the regional population, if I remember, we just saw a report, is about 543,000. So we are using most of the regional population as being potential customers of the rapid transit, whether it's LRT or BRT. As far as the payment goes, we're looking at what's the service area, and the service area is the same as the Grand River Transit service area. And we were talking about rapid transit, but it's more than just rapid transit. As Graham said, it's also about putting in all of the bus lines that will serve that corridor. So we'll have iExpress lines, type lines that serve the stations and get people from the suburbs into the rapid transit, line that we have. So it is really serving all of the area, the urban area, which justifies having that urban area paid for, versus the townships are not benefiting to the same extent. There are definitely benefits to the townships. The benefits are more along the lines of protecting the agricultural areas, making sure that cars are not cutting through the townships. If you have too much congestion in the city, people are going to take shortcuts. They'll take shortcuts through the townships. So there are benefits to the township as well, but not nearly as much as they are for the urban areas.
Okay. Alan, thank you very much for the question. Duncan asks, is there a timeline for LRT service to be extended to Cambridge? If not, what would you consider to be an idealistic time frame and a realistic time frame?
Well, we have 11 options, realistically 10, being proposed to the council right now, depending on which directive we receive from them in terms of the option they would like us to proceed with. It's hard to give timelines in terms of when. I mean, the ultimate goal is to take light rail technology to Cambridge, and that was approved by council. But with the caveat that we would have to monitor that over time. We would have to provide incentives. We would have to work with South Kitchener and Cambridge to ensure that enough development is brought along the corridors so that the ridership itself is justified. So to give a timeline is, I mean, we would be making a guesstimate on that. So it's not fair for us to say, well, by 2035 or 2025, we're going to extend it to Cambridge. We would have to really monitor it over time, make sure that we provide enough incentives or implement enough incentives such that we can have enough ridership to justify that kind of technology to be extended to Cambridge.
Right. I think the other piece of that is that we know we need to help Cambridge and focus on building ridership. So we need to help support new development along existing transit lines. We need to look at issues like corporate Grand River Transit passes to get people trained into that. So there's a lot to be done. It's not a waiting proposition, it's a building proposition. And really the larger discussion we're having is how can we get there, because ultimately the entire plan is LRT proposed from Waterloo to Kitchener to Cambridge. And if it has to be phased, how do we do that? So there's lots of work to be done in building that. But Darshpreet, I think you have some numbers as well on ridership. south
Yes.
of Fairview Mall versus north of?
Yeah, basically, as part of the environmental assessment, we did a lot of projections, and we looked at what the trends would be in future for people traveling to and from the Cambridge area. And what we discovered through our analysis was that 70% of the ridership is to the north of Fairview Park Mall. In fact, our existing ridership numbers are similar to that, not to the same percentage level, but they reflect the same pattern, that majority of the riders on a daily basis are actually north of Fairview, and the remaining are coming from the south. So it was really this unequal, you could say, distribution of benefits, of ridership benefits, that led to us looking at staging options that would provide us the benefits that we want, yet implement the technology that meets the demand that's projected for the area.
Darshpreet, you keep giving me ideas, but when you mentioned that council had already agreed, made the decision to extend rail all the way into Cambridge, that was the idea. Going back to that, then why are we here today? Why are we revisiting this issue after council had already made that decision some time ago?
There's been a lot of things. As the decision was being made by council, council also said that they wanted to see what financing was available first. So they wanted to see what money were they getting from the province, from the federal government. So one of the things that's happened since they made their decision to now is we received $300 million of funding from the provincial government and up to $265 million of funding from the federal government. It just seems prudent and reasonable for us, now that we know what finances we do have available, to go back and take a look at what are the various options, what are the right staging options, is BRT the right options, and give the public an opportunity to provide their feedback and input on that now that they see what the financial impacts are, and then us go back to council with a recommendation on how to go forward. So it just makes, I think, good financial sense to revisit that decision and take a look at it, given the new information that we have.
Very good. Okay, and thank you again for the questions. Duncan, you got us on that tangent there. Patrick is asking, how will this LRT system be integrated and complemented by the new proposed transportation hub? And that would be the new mode, I guess, or hub there at King and Victoria.
Correct. And maybe I'll ask Graham to start.
Right. Okay. So the plan is that King and Victoria would be the northeast corner. That we would build a multimodal transportation hub that would accommodate all modes of transportation. So the intent would to have Via and Go stop at this new station. Go is planning rail passenger service starting in the fall of this year, and there would be an LRT station right at that intersection of King and Victoria. In addition to that, we are looking at realigning our conventional routes. So the stops that now go into the Charles Street terminal, some would now use Victoria Street with the new system, and there'd be about 6 or 7 routes that would go along Victoria Street. They would also be integrated with the transportation hub. The remainder of the routes would go along Frederick Street, and again, this is to integrate it with the rapid transit system. And as important components of that is also that we make sure that the proper cycling and pedestrian facilities are made to facilitate movements to this hub. We're also looking at intercity travel. Buses such as Greyhound could also use this hub. So the intent is that you could take a whole trip from your home to Toronto or any other location just using transit, some form of transit, and that would all be integrated at the hub at King and Victoria.
I think the other exciting piece to that, Mike, is that there is development potential on that property. So on one corner, we've got the Kaufman condominiums, we've got the School of Pharmacy and the School of Medicine. On the other corner, we have another site that's probably ready for redevelopment, kitty corner to us. But there is likely the potential for some mixed-use development right at that corner. And we are just embarking on exploring what that might look like. Does it make sense for the region to go out and seek proposals? And as well, it's a major gateway for Kitchener. And it's a great opportunity for us in many, many ways. So we're envisioning at this point a very high level of urban form, something that complements the functionality, but there's a real value added to this property.
Okay. Great question. We have another from one of our webcast viewers. Yvonne, 9 years old, wants to know, when will you start building the trains and when can I start using them?
Right now, given we have direction from Council by June to proceed with one of the options that we presented to them, we're expecting that construction could start in 2014. And depending on the option, the length of construction itself could vary. We're assuming 2014, 2015, and 2016, so a 3-year period which would capture all the different options with the exception of the full light rail system. And so it's within that so by 2016, by the end or early 2017, we should have service in operations.
Okay. So 2014 for the starting point. So Yvonne, who's 9 now, will be about 12 years old when that gets started.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for the question, Yvonne. I thought you might have had something there, Thomas. Okay. Let's go to another webcast viewer question. We've got Bill. Says he just returned from Vancouver, lucky guy, and while there, inquired on ridership. I was told they are already at the projection for 2016. Is this consistent with other systems in North America?
I can't speak on behalf of the information that the resident just gave to us, but like I was giving you an example before, typically most light rail systems or rapid transit systems usually are underestimating the projections. So by the time they're implemented and within the first few years, they far exceed whatever the projections are. And then you're in the cycle of making sure that you have enough vehicles to meet that demand. So I would say it is pretty consistent. The advantage that Vancouver had was we had Olympics. So when the new Canada line was implemented, it was a new service that was provided to thousands of people coming for the Olympics. So it set the standard, and they generated a very solid base based on that. But even if the Olympics weren't there, most other cities have shown that it's a similar pattern that they observe. They implement something, they underestimate the latent demand, and within the first few years, they far exceed the projections they had.
So go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, I was just going to say from a local experience, our transit ridership increased by 8.7% in 2010, which is actually quite phenomenal and one of the highest rates in the country. So it's been, and on top of that, there was very little service improvements that were implemented in 2010. So we've seen a very strong growth in ridership. Rob mentioned earlier that we've gone to 18 million rides from 9.4 over the past decade, almost a double. And again, it's the increased levels of service that we've been able to provide that has brought ridership. We also exceeded our ridership expectations for our iExpress service that was implemented. We're now averaging about 7,000 trips a day on iExpress as well.
So, and it's important to note that iExpress line pretty closely follows the line that we're proposing for both BRT and LRT. So it's very similar area that we're covering with the iExpress as what we would be with LRT or BRT.
It seems by those statements, and I'm just the guy sitting here moderating this, but the challenge is just getting people on the first time. And once they begin to ride, yes, then the ridership continues and grows from there. Yeah. Okay. Michael writes in, Toronto's mayor plans to use development charges and tax increment financing to fund a subway line. What is stopping us from using that to pay for part of rapid transit? That's a good one.
And right now, neither Toronto nor the region of Waterloo could legislatively actually implement development charges or the TIFs. But we are working with the province, so we have been meeting with them, and we're trying to see if we can get either development charges or the TIFs as options for providing financing. So if those become available, what that really does is lowers the property impact, tax impact on residents. So we are looking at those as options to help finance the LRT or BRT lines.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much for the question. Another viewer writes in, can you bring a bike onto the LRT?
Definitely. If you ever get a chance to travel to Portland or any other city with the LRT system, you would notice that right where you enter the vehicle itself, they usually provide a large enough space for anyone who's on a wheelchair, anyone who has a buggy carrying groceries with them, and they have racks for bikes to be hung. So usually these vehicles are designed to accommodate the needs of the different patrons that use the service.
Thank you very much for the question. Let's move on to one from Tony. Have you considered a zero fare system around the downtown cores for the system? Oh, sorry. Okay, that's a two-parter. I apologize, Tony. So have you considered a zero fare system around the downtown and for the system itself?
Again, we're at a stage where we first have to define a project that we can proceed with. So these discussions are happening informally within internally, but we haven't really made a decision on that. There would be reports that would come forth once we know what the project is, and we have proceeded far enough in the design process to make recommendations to council. I can understand where this is coming from, because Portland initially, in their downtown core, had made it free for public to use on weekends and weeknights to encourage people to use transit. So we will definitely consider those options, but at the end it would be council who would make the final recommendation on what the fare system should be.
Okay.
And right now, the cost options that we have, they do include payment for fares.
Yes.
So there is the operating costs, our net operating costs. We have operating costs, and we have revenues from customers using the system.
Okay.
So that would change the property tax impact if we went to a no-fare system, either in the downtown core areas or over the whole system. But as Darshpreet said, ultimately that's a decision council would make on what you do with the fares.
Okay. And to be fair, we have kept the current fares the same for the future. So when we do the net operating costs, we are basing the fare revenue based on what we charge the public today, which would obviously change. But just to be conservative, we have we've made the same assumptions for fares that we use today on our system, on our rapid transit system in the future.
Right. Thomas, it was your turn to give me an idea here when you said property tax rate. What is the impact going to be on property taxes to fund this system? Because we've heard a variety of numbers.
Sure, and it varies a bit from option to option, but the main options start at about, the lowest priced option is $14.63 per year. We've looked at a financing plan that essentially has increases for a 6-year period. So each year taxes would go up $14.63 is the lowest option. The lowest of what we would say, the highest of what we would say are sort of the reasonable options is about $30 a year. So the difference isn't really that huge. It's about $14 from the lowest to the highest.
Right.
The ones that I'm not counting, the light rail transit option from all the way from Conestoga Mall to Ainslie Street, the whole option would be about $63 each of those 6 years, which we think is probably more than most people would want to pay. But the other options are, when you look at it, really not that expensive and are all very close together.
Right. Okay. Let's go to another question from one of our webcast viewers. Philip wants to know why do many of the alternatives start at Northfield rather than at Conestoga, which is a major destination?
Well, in fact, we have an equal balance. So the options, we have all the options that start at Conestoga and similar options then that start at Northfield. So I'm not sure if the person asking the question had the opportunity to see all of them, but it's an equal balance between the two starting points. So we have 4 options starting at Conestoga and then 4 options starting in Northfield. And the terminus point for both is similar.
Okay.
Part of why we've done the different starting and stopping at different places is to look at what are the different benefits we get. And obviously there is a difference. Starting at Northfield has less benefit than starting at Conestoga Mall, but it also has a lower cost. So it's really trying to look at that value proposition for people and having people have an opportunity to look at this and go, well, it doesn't make sense to start at Northfield. It would make sense to pay a little bit more and start at Conestoga Mall. I mean, that's the type of feedback we're looking for people. If they see that as valuable to them, that's helpful for us to know.
Right. Okay. Philip, thank you for the question. Another question comes in from a viewer asking specifically, how will Cambridge users benefit from rapid transit?
Well, it will be an integrated rapid transit system. So whether it's LRT, BRT, or ABRT, they are all going to fit together. It's going to be a seamless system. There will be increased and better service for Cambridge than there is now. If it's ABRT, it's still going to be much better than what they have now. It will provide an opportunity to connect easily into the system in Kitchener-Waterloo. It will start to provide the framework for the growth in ridership in Cambridge, which will get us to the point where we are putting LRT into Cambridge. If that's the option, I'm talking LRT, and I'm assuming that's what the question is about, is why Cambridge isn't getting LRT. But they will definitely benefit with the connection, same level of service and connection into the existing systems.
Okay. Thank you for the question. We've got another from Andrew. Andrew says the zoning in areas around proposed rapid transit lines and stations needs attention to achieve intensification. How is the region working with the cities on this?
Okay, the short answer is very closely. For those who don't know about zoning, zoning is a specific set of regulations, and they are administered by the area municipalities in this region. And they deal with things like, what are the permitted uses, what are the setbacks, how high can I build, how dense can I build. And so it's a very specific code around what you can do with your property. The Tri-Cities have all been working with us to look at their zoning in different ways. For example, the City of Waterloo is focused on their height and density study, and that really guides council in considering development applications. The City of Kitchener has looked at corridors to a great extent. So there's lots of pre-planning that's occurring. I think the one reality is that you cannot always predict. So you cannot always get the zoning just the right way. And so there's always iterations, there's zoning amendments that have to occur. And we know this from other communities like Portland, where they basically have shown us that they did their best to anticipate, yet there's always adjustments that have to be made. So lots going on that way. I think the other point I'd make, though, is that there are a lot of other tools that the area municipalities, the cities and the region are working with. One, for example, is called a tax increment grant. And it's a way of helping owners of contaminated sites to redevelop their properties. And probably one of the best examples is the Lang Tannery, not too far from us tonight. That was the first tax increment grant that the region and the City of Kitchener did jointly to help that site to be redeveloped and for the contamination to be remediated. So not only zoning, but lots of other tools that we're exploring and applying.
Okay. Andrew, thank you very much for the question. Another one comes in from a viewer tonight. We have an iExpress system. There are only certain times of the day when the buses are full. Common sense would suggest that adding a few more buses during these times would be the right approach.
Graham can perhaps answer that more accurately than I can, but the iExpress system was implemented in 2003, I believe.
2006.
2006. And over the last 5 years, we have gone from a daily ridership of about 3,000 to, like Graham mentioned previously, close to 7,000, 8,000. So to suggest that the buses are running empty, I would say an unfair statement. There may be off-peak hours where the ridership isn't as, or the buses aren't as full as they would be in the peak hour, but we are still producing a daily ridership of 7,000 plus, which is pretty significant. So it's hard for me to believe that we would have actually buses running empty through the service hours of the iExpress.
Right.
Yeah, perhaps just to add to that, our records are indicating that about 30% of the trips are exceeding seated capacity, and in the range of about 5% exceeding standing capacity. So we know there are times of the day when the buses are quite full, and we also believe that the ridership on the iExpress is limited by the capacity that we're putting on the street now. And there's no question there are times of the day when the iExpress is running where the ridership is lower, but the volume on the roads are also lower at that same time of day as well. So it's just the nature of the types of trips. But certainly during the peak periods, we see a lot of growth. We do intend to add buses, and part of the budget proposal this year is to increase the frequency on the iExpress service. But that's a short-term fix. Longer term, as the corridor intensifies and more trips are occurring in there, the iExpress won't be able to service that corridor anymore, or those trips.
Okay, thank you both. Kirsten writes in, what is the life expectancy of trains versus buses? We talked a little bit about the trains versus buses earlier, but in terms of life expectancy?
Both can be extended with proper maintenance, but trains by far exceed the life expectancy of a bus. Typically, we're doing full maintenance on our buses every 11 or 12 years, whereas trains, there are systems in Europe and in North America where they are about 80 years old and still running. So the actual light rail vehicle can last far longer than a bus would. And it's just as, with proper maintenance, it would be just as green as it was when it was new. So whereas a bus, as it gets older, the emission levels aren't the same, even if you try to maintain it at the level it was when you purchased it new.
So GRT buses, for example, they're now on a 12-year cycle. So a GRT bus essentially is here for 12 years. And after 12 years, it's retired. And trains, 30-plus years.
Okay, great question. We've got, let's go to another one here. And if we had an all-BRT system, would we really need to have raised lane dividers? Can't we save a lot more money by just having painted lanes only?
Well, the cost of dividers itself is not that significant when considering the cost of the project. But the need for them is very significant. The idea behind rapid transit is reliability, which comes from speed. Passengers expect a certain frequency. They want the bus to be there when we have said it would be there. So if we don't provide lane dividers, or if we don't have, people would be making left turns. And really, we have to make sure that we deter traffic from making use of these lanes or crossing them at unsignalized locations. So, like I said, the cost of the divider is not an issue. It's really, we want to make sure that you deter normal traffic from using or crossing these where it's not intended to be, so that you can ensure that the buses or like train vehicles can actually meet or are reliable by keeping their speeds up and actually making to the next station within the time frame or the schedule that we identify for it.
Okay. Thank you very much for all of the questions that you've sent in tonight. As we work against the clock on this 1-hour webcast, I wanted to finish by sharing with each of you an excerpt from an editorial that appeared in the Waterloo Region Record, because it seems to encapsulate a lot of the things that we're talking about, and then we'll get your thoughts, each of you, on it. Here's what it said. Before picking one option, the community must determine exactly what it is trying to achieve. Is this just about public transit and improving the bus system we already have? Or do people think that Waterloo Region should use rapid transit for urban renewal as a way to shape our urban centres and meet the requirements set down in Ontario law for greater population density in city cores? Are we comfortable with a rapid transit solution that will serve the community for the next 10 or 15 years? Or do we want to build for the future, for 20 years from now and even longer? Thomas, we'll begin with you. Do you agree with that these are the key decision points that we're looking at?
Yeah, they're definitely key decision points. And I look at it a bit from a technology perspective, the LRT versus BRT part of it. And for me, building a BRT system that within about 20 to 25 years is going to be at capacity doesn't make a lot of sense when we're really looking further into the future than that. And building a system that's going to meet the needs of the regions past that 20-year time frame really is what we're talking about. Planning for the next 50 years or longer is really the plan we have in place. So for me, yes, definitely those are the key decisions. And from a technology perspective, I really think LRT is the option that does look further into the future than BRT does.
Okay. Mike, over the past 5 years, in fact, all the work that we have done has been an effort to address these two questions specifically. And the analysis and the findings have clearly shown that one technology alone is the most effective in terms of meeting the objectives and the vision that the region has for its future. I mean, pretty much that's what we have been doing for the extensive work over the past 5 years, and I totally agree that these need to be considered as part of any initiative like the one that Region has taken for rapid transit.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, I think building on that, Mike, if there's one central theme I would ask the community to think about is it's the idea that we're talking about moving people and shaping the community, not just moving people. And I think this is something that suits us. If I go back to the 1976 Regional Official Plan, it really did plan around a central spine, a central transit spine. And we have actually grown, and we are growing, and things are occurring around us already. And I know we really ran out of time tonight, but we also need to think of ourselves as a global community. We compete every day in the global marketplace. We have to be a vibrant community. We have to offer all different types of living opportunities and greater proximity to live and work than we ever have before. We compete with Mitaka, Japan, Dundee, Scotland, Eindhoven in the Netherlands. all manner of places on a daily basis, and we have to make sure that we have that vibrant community to offer the global community and continue to build on that success that we have as an intelligent community.
Graham.
Mike, when we went out to the community on the growth management strategy and the transportation master plan, we were told that the community wanted to see a vibrant and sustainable community. There are several key decisions, I think, that are going to be made over the next few years that are going to be key to achieving this. We really are at a crossroads right now. With the existing transportation system starting to reach capacity, and with the additional travel generated by the 200,000 additional people that will be coming to the region, it's going to be a real challenge. So the decisions we make now and the path that we take will really define the vibrancy and the sustainability of our future community.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you all. Time certainly flies, and thank you all for viewing from wherever it is you are viewing this webcast tonight. It's unfortunately all the time we have for this particular webcast, but this is by no means the end of the conversation on rapid transit. For those of you who have questions that we did not get to answer directly tonight, please be assured they will be considered by the region's rapid transit team. We invite each and every one of you to visit the region's website. That is at www.region.waterloo.on.ca/rapid transit. At that spot, you will find details about each of the options we've discussed tonight, including information on costs, ridership, property tax impacts, and more, of course, about each possible route. Based on public input and additional evaluation, staff will recommend a preferred option to the region's Planning and Works Committee on April the 12th, and then the region will embark on yet another round of public consultation to let you review and comment on the recommended approach. Perhaps we might even do another webcast. So our thanks to Thomas, Darshpreet, Rob, and Graham for being a part of this panel tonight, and again to you for being a part of it via watching this webcast. Again, visit the website region.waterloo.on.ca/rapid transit and make sure you have your say. Thanks very much for watching and participating. Good night.